Coalesce podcast. My name's Grant.
And I'm Meg.
And today we're going to look at asking the question, when do you create a component? And it's often, we get this question all the time. And the problem is that there isn't like a super good answer because it's somewhat dependent on what your needs are. And Meg, we were kind of talking beforehand a little bit about some of the use cases. So what was one of the ones that you brought up as far as a reason to do that?
Yeah, one of the most common ones is just code reusability, right? I mean, it's the same reason that you'd make a function is so that you can use that function in multiple spots. So if you have some dialogue that you want to show in one screen, but you also want to show it in this other screen, it doesn't make sense to write that code twice. Just pop it into a component and call that component in the two different spots. So that's a really probably a very common, one of the most common reasons.
The most common thing. So if you're using displaying the same thing in two spots, like you need to make that into a component. That is the right thing to do. You do not want to duplicate that code. And they may be slightly different, right? And I think we may in another episode, if that's an interest to folks, may do that. Like let's say I want to display a classic example is like a dialog box. I want to show like an editor that pops up, and I want to use it in the context here and on this other screen too, because I can edit this from the same spot. And so that would be pretty common. But you may need to do things a little bit differently, and so it requires some thinking. I think this is one of the hardest parts of doing Vue because you have to know kind of what you're doing underlying the process. So okay, that's one. Another one that is one that I like. And initially in Coalesce, when we used knockout in the kind of the old days, we had an is selected property. And so the question is, well, how do you do the selection thing with an object? How do I append something to an object and make that happen? So that's another use case. And the third one is just your file is just too big, right? There's too many things going on, and there's getting too much logic kind of built into the one thing, and you want to be able to split some of that logic out. And usually that's taking some of your Vue kind of HTML code as well as some of your TypeScript and maybe even some of your styling and moving that off into a separate component. So those are all really good reasons to do that. So we're going to look at this our answer summary, our question summary page that we built the other day that has the counts and things like that on it, because it's all looking great. But let's say we want to be able to select those or something like that and be able to just make this look a little bit nicer.
Yeah. So I think what we're going to kind of propose is that we're going to add a little checkbox here. And when you click it, it'll kind of highlight the back of it. So you just know it when you're selecting. And then from there, you guys can do whatever you want if you've got selections going on. I mean, you could do like mass updates or mass deletes of these questions and stuff like that. So this is kind of the basis for bulk editing in a sense.
And there's actually a couple of ways to do this. And there are some very, very opinionated schools of thought about how you do this. I don't know that I have a really strong opinion. I tend to go for the simplest solution as opposed to the one that I find the most theoretically proper. And in this case, I think probably the simplest solution is that you'd actually manage an array at the top level.
Yeah. And something that we're going to use here is the Vuetify checkbox, this guy here. And what's nice about this is that it kind of handles a lot of the stuff we're going to do for you. So this is really what we're going to use, right? Where you have multiple things and it updates an array.
And Meg, let's actually show this by putting the checkbox in line right now and how it would work. And then we'll just kind of build it a piece at a time so folks really understand how this works. And honestly, we're viewing very little Coalesce in this episode. This is mostly just Vue stuff, but we feel like it's a really important thing to cover.
It is, yeah. So I think I'm going to replace this question ID.
Get rid of that question ID. We don't need that. Nobody cares.
It's verbose. And we're going to print it out in the top when we select. So we'll get rid of question ID here. And I am going to leave the table header though, because I want to put a checkbox right here. So the checkbox. And then this is going to have a V model equals selected IDs. And down here, we will make a new const selected IDs equals, it's almost right. I just want it to be a string because our IDs are strings. Okay, there's that.
You want to new that up to an array.
Yes, there we go. Now, let's just show this up here. Selected IDs. Okay, so there's our array. It's empty. And, oh, that didn't work exactly right.
Oh, why didn't it work? Well, because we don't know what we were
We
actually
we
selecting.
didn't add that value in.
So the question is what value are you actually putting into the array? Is what
Yeah.
it comes down to.
So you can see the way that this one's working. It has the label and the value are the same, but you can see the value is what's actually showing up in that array. So they could put like an ID here.
Right.
So what we want to do.
And if you notice, there were no colons before those, and so it was just a string value. And so in this case, we actually want whatever the value is of the property.
Yeah. There we go.
So evaluate that. So that's going to evaluate to the ID.
Now that is working. So there's that working.
Nice array.
You can see all our IDs. I assume those IDs line up. They look different enough.
Now, the downside of this is that we can't, I mean, I guess we could color that line right now and do it all, but we can't really make a component out of that. Like if we wanted to say, hey, let's use this on another page. So we're going to pretend like we have another page that we want to display the same information on and 2 pages that we want to do selections like this for. So we're going to take that whole row and move it into a component.
Yeah, and like Grant said, you can do what we're about to do just right here in line, but the other problem there is that the logic gets complicated and you end up writing functions down here that are like functions that you have to pass specific IDs into in order to get this like logic working. Whereas if you move this to a component, those functions turn into computed properties and it's much more isolated.
Right. And Meg, you bring up a great point, is that you know that you may want to create a component when you end up passing the current object into whatever the method is that you're trying to call. And so that means that, oh, hey, if I had some isolation around this component, I could then just work on that one thing as opposed to having to pass those values in.
Yeah, so it just makes it simpler. It's not something you have to do, but it makes it significantly simpler to read and even to maintain.
Yep.
Okay, so there's that, and we're gonna take this whole thing. I'll bring that for loop back here in a second. So we're gonna
because we're on the TR, we're gonna take that for loop, and when we add the component, the for loop will actually be on the component.
Yeah. So now in the body, instead of having that TR, we're gonna have question summary row, and we'll close that, and that just takes us in. Now we do have to start passing some props in. So let's come here, const props equals define props. It kind of knows
we really
what
want to pass in our question summary.
Okay. So we want question summary. I'm going to pass in the view model. We don't need the view model, but
right. And just to clarify, the question summary is just the object, no ability to do saves or loads or anything like that, where the question summary view model has all of the nice API calls on it.
Yep. And you can see our category isn't working.
So we're going to go grab the category, which is kind of nice. So now we've removed the dependency on category from the parent component and moved it in here. So that's, I think, a general win. It just makes it a little bit nicer.
Yep. Okay. So there's that all hooked up. The only thing not working is this selected IDs. So one way that we can do this is, well, there's a couple ways, right? You can pass this in as a prop, but the issue you run into is when you pass it in as a prop is you're not supposed to update props from a child because props are a one-way binding. So if you pass it in as a prop, you have to hook up emits to tell the parent that it's been updated. What we want to do really is set up a two-way binding using a view model. So we can define, you notice here this v dash model, we can define our own one of those for our component. So the way that we would do that is we'd say const, and we can call it whatever. You can call it model, you can call it, I'm going to call it selected IDs though, because that's kind of what our other thing is called. And then define model. And then we're going to type this as a string array. And it is going to be required. So there should be an error because we are not passing. So yeah, because we're not passing this in. Well, that might be the error there. If we come back here, yeah, there's an error here because we need to pass in our view model. So there's selected IDs. Now let's refresh this guy. Okay, should work exactly the same. Now, the nice thing that we have here is this is all isolated to our one component. If we wanted to change the background of this table row, we could just add a little style tag. I mean, maybe don't do inline styles, but you can go make a class, and you can make this nicer, right, when you do it. So, oh, and we probably want to go.
We could actually use a class too, right? If you wanted to, just add a class to that.
Yeah, just make a class, but that's gonna take too much of my time right now, so we're not gonna do that. So we're gonna make a computed property the same is selected, and I think that's actually exactly what I want. The only thing here is that can be, this shouldn't be null, so I'm just gonna use the bang symbol to indicate that. Okay, then style is selected, background color, and you can actually tie into Vitifi's variables here with RGB, var, and then I know another variable name, so you have to go look them up if you don't know. But I'm just going to make this the primary color. And then we're just not going to apply any style if it isn't selected. So if it is selected, we'll make the background color our primary color, which should be green. And then if it's not selected, we won't do anything. So let's just refresh. So there we go.
Nice.
So there's one way to do it.
So now so if we go back and look at some of that code, so the weird part about this is that the component is having to deal with the selected array, right? And ideally, you don't want to do, I mean, you just kind of want to say, hey, is it selected or not? But then you have this issue of how do I let the parent know that the thing is selected?
Yeah. And and I guess the main issue here is that we have isolated some of the code, but it's not so isolated. Like, this is still touching some of the parents' code. I mean, they're kind of sharing this one thing, and it goes kind of against that isolation idea. So what we could do is we could instead keep this array solely on the parent, not pass in this V model, and instead use emit to update the parent when this checkbox has been checked or not. So the way we would do that is we'd start by removing this V model. We'll remove it here as well. And then back on the child, we no longer have selected IDs. We're actually just going to have is selected. So what's nice about this is that with the selected IDs, when you look at this, it's a little confusing because you only have one checkbox, and this is an array. Now, because we're doing is selected, it makes a little more sense with just our one checkbox when you look at this from just the child. So let's go make a variable for our is selected. We're actually going to delete this guy too. So it's going to, there we go. So false. So that's going to start off as false. Now, this is going to work on the child, but you can see our parent's not getting updated. Our parent has some old data in it. Ignore that. So this is now working, but we do want to let our parent know, like, hey, we still want you to update this array whenever we click these things.
Because we basically now isolated it all the way to that child component, and the parent isn't doing anything.
Yeah, has no idea what's going on anymore. Out of control child.
Because the only thing that we're passing in is really that question summary, and there is no way to get the data back.
Yeah. What we want to do is we want to define an emit. And there's a couple of syntax options here. We're going to use one that I just learned, so bear with me. I used to use a different syntax.
It's kind of cool. It seems like the simplest way.
What am I doing? There we go. Doing that backwards. Okay, so in here, we're going to name our emit. If I can spell it. And then this is going to take an array of is selected bool. So this is what we're going to use as the event name to propagate to the parent, and it's going to send back if a bool is, if this child is or is not selected, right? True or false.
Now, one thing we could have done right there is we could have actually returned the ID of the thing that is selected. So there is some advantage to returning that right here if you want to, because then you have some context. We're going to do a closure on the other side to handle that. But you could do this, and there's maybe arguably slightly simpler, but you have the data in the other spot as well.
Yeah. Yep. And then we're just going to add a watcher on here, and all a watcher does is it just runs every time the thing you're watching changes. So every time that this turns to true, it'll run the watcher, and then when it goes back to false, it'll run the watcher again. So there's a little IntelliSense there too, which is kind of nice because it knows that it looks like a string, but it knows that it's the name of the event. It's kind of a weird syntax, but it's okay. Okay, so our child's all set up. Now we have to go over to the parent, and
it's still not going to do anything because we're not handling the event that's now coming off. So it's not doing anything. But we're at least we're sending an event. And don't be afraid of emits. I think emits are really helpful, especially if you wanted to have a lot of isolation between your code. This is really the way you do it.
Yeah, emits are a very helpful tool. So it's a great way to let your parent component kind of know what your child's up to and handle like refreshes and stuff like that. Okay, so on here we're going to add an event of.
And this is just like it would be an at click, right? So we basically just made a custom at click. There we go.
Yep. And then we're going to add a little lambda. It really wants to do more than I want it to do. It doesn't know that I want to write this into a function. So that's about what I want there. So
we'll come back and talk about this in just a second once we get the rest of this in there, because this is a little bit complicated.
Yeah, I just want to kind of get my method signature set up, and then is that what I want? I think that's what I want.
Yeah, I think it's close. Yeah,
you got to be careful with Copilot because it'll write a bug that's hard to find. I think that's what I want though. That looks right.
90% of the time it's 3 times as fast, and 10% of the time it's 10 times as slow.
Okay.
Maybe it's up to 95% now.
Yeah.
So what's happening here is we are syncing this event, selection change. Selection changed is going to return just a bool, right? So in this case, if we call the method, it would just have a bool. So down here in selection change, we would just have a bool coming in, and we wouldn't know what the ID was, right?
Yeah, we don't know what to push or what to filter out.
Right. So what we have to do is we then create a little lambda function up there, which is going to close on the question ID. So what it does is it remembers what the question ID is when we created this, so that there's essentially all these little instances of this method that we're going to call selection changed is selected with the question summary ID tacked onto that. And so this is one of the wonderful uses of closures, allowing us to hold on to that question summary ID across a number of iterations.
Yeah. And now the other thing you could have done is over here, you could have also emitted the ID.
Let's show that work. Let's show that one working, and then let's actually change it to the other way.
Yeah. So here we go. Our parent now knows. We'll deselect. Okay, good.
Yeah, there we go. Nice. He's like, hey, Copilot came through for us.
Yeah, I was like, it looks right, it looks correct, but you never know with it sometimes.
So let's change it to the other way, so where we're actually handing that ID back. And you can actually hand the whole object back if you wanted to. You wouldn't just have to hand the ID. All we needed was the ID, and so we just handed the ID back.
Yeah, but you're gonna have to help me, Grant, with this new syntax because I usually don't use this syntax.
Yeah,
is it as an array?
Comma right there. Yep, comma there. Yep, you got it.
All right.
ID string, right?
I'm trusting you.
We changed that.
No, I think this will all actually. Emit. Yeah, we do. It's now mad that I haven't.
Yep. So that has an error, right? So we're gonna hand in the other. Great, perfect.
Okay. Now over here, I think we can just call.
Selection changed.
Just like this. We don't even need the.
Don't need anything else. Yep.
As long as this method signature matches what we're doing.
It just happened to.
Oh, look at that.
So there's the same thing. Now, one can argue maybe that's a little bit simpler. We're passing a little bit more data back. We thought it was a great option.
It helps more with that isolation, though. I mean, it makes sure that the child is solely responsible for its data. The parent is solely responsible for its data. Right. So it totally does that separation.
So, well, great. Yeah. I think that kind of covers what we think are kind of the main uses. We may think of some more, and so who knows if we have another episode on that. But you got some when to create components. So when you want to get reuse, if you have something that's happening multiple times, if you want to kind of isolate the properties inside of and the handling of particular events and things like that inside of a component, and keep that out of your main kind of the whatever component or page you're working in. And the other one is just if your page is just too long, you're getting too many things in there and too many functions, too much HTML/view code, and you want to break that out and just to make it simpler. So I think those are the main things. Meg, what else do you have?
I think that's it. Yeah, that covers kind of one of the more complicated cases of it.
So awesome. Well, until next time, keep on writing some amazing Coalesce apps.
Thanks all.